Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Straw Hat Luffy, The Black Fist by J.R.R. Toast. What if Luffy had never eaten the devil fruit Shanks had brought into the bar that day? What if he started sailing a little earlier than canon? How would his story be different? Would he be the same Luffy we know and love? One thing is for sure, Luffy and his friends are in for a wild adventure. Adios.
Chapter 1. Born to conquer, to Luffy and his bravery, shouted a certain red-haired pirate captain. As the words left his mouth, party's bar erupted into cheers. We find ourselves on Dawn Island, the home of Monkey D. Luffy, the 7-year-old boy, resides in Fuchsia Village, located in the Goa Kingdom. The village is relatively small and more often than not, nothing of consequence happens in the area. However, for the past year, a certain pirate crew has been using the village as its base of operations in the East Blue. This leads us to now, just after our young protagonist has attempted to show his courage to his role model by stabbing himself with a knife under his eye. It didn't hurt at all. Nope, not one bit. The young boy yelled with a smile. Luffy was currently trying, and consequently failing, to hide the pain on his face from his role model, the captain of the red-haired pirates, red-haired Shanks. Liar, Shanks yelled back at the boy, lightly smacking him. You could have blinded yourself. Luffy held his head and pouted. But see, now you know I can be a pirate, plus my punch is as strong as a pistol. He exclaimed, punching through the air. Please take me with you, Shanks. Behind the two, the rest of Shanks' crew was beginning to like the idea of the kid joining them for their next voyage. Come on, Shanks. Why not let the kid come? It could be fun to watch him do more stupid stuff. Various members of the crew shouted in agreement. Alright, fine, Shanks began. At this, Luffy was practically vibrating in excitement. He was finally going to be a pirate. But only if one of you takes his place here in Fuchsia, the man finished with a smirk. The reaction was immediate. Sorry kid. Looks like you're stuck here, they all yelled in unison. Traitors. Luffy screamed back in outrage. Look Luffy, you're just too young. If you were, like, 10 years older, then maybe we'd talk, but you're just a little 7-year-old brat that can't even swim. You sink just like an anchor and a punch as strong as a pistol? Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it, Shanks said before cracking up laughing. What would we do if you fell off the ship during a fight? Well, then I'll be a pirate who never leaves the ship, ha. Now take me with you, Luffy countered determinedly. But then how could you go on amazing adventures if you never leave the ship? Going on adventures is the best part of being a pirate. Well, that and drinking as much as you want, exclaimed Shanks, his crew shouting their agreement. Before Luffy could get in his rebuttal, Shanks began telling him tales of the adventures he and his crew had gone on and some of the trouble they'd gotten into. As the man relayed his stories, time seemed to fly by for the boy who sat listening, mesmerized by the adventures of the pirate crew. The argument from before was almost completely forgotten. After a time had passed, Shanks eventually stopped his storytelling and got back to drinking and partying with his crew, leaving Luffy all by himself at the bar. Quickly becoming bored without someone entertaining him, Luffy began to look for something to occupy his time. His eyes eventually settled on a treasure chest at the end of the bar. With stars in his eyes at the thought of pirate treasure, Luffy made his way to the chest to inspect what was inside. As the young boy made his way closer, he began to hear an unintelligible whisper. Looking around the bar, he wondered why he could hear such a quiet whisper when the party around him was so loud. Locking his eyes on the chest, he could feel the whisper coming from it. How he could feel it, he didn't have a clue, just that he could. Coming closer, the whisper began to grow louder, not in tone, but in volume, still sounding like someone whispering but just louder. Now even more curious than before after realizing the whispering was emanating from the treasure chest, the boy looked around the bar before carefully opening the top. When the chest cracked open, Luffy could finally make out the words he was hearing, not bothering to wonder why he was the only one that could. The rest of the occupants of the bar seemed to be oblivious to the voice coming from the box. Eat me. Eat me. Eat me. Luffy finally opened the top all the way and could see what looked to be some sort of purple fruit about the size of a grapefruit. The weird part about the fruit wasn't its color or the size of it, it was the fact that the skin looked to be covered in swirls. Looking at something he had never tried before, Luffy's stomach began to grumble, and being a boy controlled by his appetite, he reached his hand toward the purple curiosity with the hope that it tasted good. Just as his hand was about to clutch the strange fruit, however, he faltered. "Eat me. Eat me. Eat me." The voice was now much louder than before and he didn't really understand why. One thing he did know, however, was he wanted the voice to be quiet again. So, he quickly took his hand away and shut the chest, the whisper once again becoming quiet and unintelligible. Suddenly, the doors to the bar were violently thrown open, and in walked a group of rugged-looking men. The men sauntered through the establishment, sizing up all the pirates, and eventually found their way to the bar. Luffy turned from his place in front of the now closed treasure chest to inspect the newcomers, the voice and the fruit almost completely forgotten, almost. "My name is Higuma, leader of these mountain bandits and a man with a 8 million berry bounty on his head," the man at the front stated smugly. "Now, we ain't here to cause no trouble, we just want some good booze to drink." He looked around and counted heads, about 12 barrels of best stuff should do. The barmaid, Makino, looked to the man and replied with an apologetic smile, "I'm sorry sir, we're actually out of alcohol at the moment. Can I interest you in anything else?" A scowl took over Higuma's face. "Out of booze, huh?" The man turned and eyed the pirates in the bar. "Then what, might I ask? Are these pirates drinkin'?" he questioned, replacing his scowl with a menacing smile. Beginning to see what the situation might become, Makino's form shook slightly, replying with a stutter, "Well, sir, they are drinking sake. However, I'm sorry to say they bought up the last of it that I had in stock." Placing a hand on the woman's shoulder and giving the barmaid a quick smile, Shanks came to her rescue. "Sorry about that," he said with a laugh, "my crew and I were really thirsty. Seems we drank the place dry." Seeing the last bottle of sake sitting on the bar, the redhead grabbed it and held it up to the man with a smile. "Looks like we have one last bottle. It's not much, but it's yours if you'd like." Eyeing the bottle held before him, Higuma grabbed it and turned, as if to walk away. Just as the situation seemed to be dealt with, the mountain bandit whipped around and smashed the unopened bottle on Shanks, bringing the man to the ground and making a mess of the floor below. Out of the entire bar, only 2 people noticed the slight blackening of a small spot on his head as the bottle connected with it. As soon as it would have been noticeable, for most, it was gone. One of the 2 was the first mate of the red-haired pirates, the gray-haired man smiling to himself. He didn't think anyone else was looking close enough to see. Plus, haky was a norm on the Red Force. So, any crewmates who might have noticed, wouldn't care anyway. Through his smile, however, he did have the urge to scold his captain even though he knew the man was just having a little fun. That power wasn't supposed to exist in the part of the world they were currently in. The other person who noticed was a small boy of 7 years old, wondering what the curious black spot on the pirate captain's head could have been. Usually, Luffy would have quickly forgotten something so small, but for some reason, it stuck in the back of his head. He would have to bring it up with Shanks later. Right Nose tried to keep himself from screaming at the stupid bandit that had hit his role model. "One measly bottle of sake ain't anywhere close to enough for us," Higuma shouted as he looked down at Shanks. For a moment, no one knew what the pirate captain would do as he sat there on the floor, straw hat shadowing his eyes. After staying in his position on the ground, for what felt like an eternity to the rest of the bar, the straw-hatted man got to his knees and began trying to gather all of the pieces of broken glass. "Sorry about the mess, Makino. You don't happen to have any rags or something I could clean this up with, do you?" he asked sheepishly, a small smile gracing his face. At this, all of the pirates in the room let out a sigh of relief. They knew how things could have ended up. "Shanks, please let me do that," Makino replied sincerely. It was her job after all. "Nonsense, it's my fault the floor is all messy. I should be the one to clean it up," the redhead reasoned in response. Against her better judgment, Makino acquiesced and stepped behind the bar to grab a rag for the handsome red-haired man. Once the rag had reached his hand, Shanks began to clean the large mess beneath him. Higuma continued to watch the pathetic pirate clean up the floor with a scowl on his face. "Oh, so y'all like cleaning, do y'all? Y'all like it so much you won't even let the bar bitch clean it for you, huh? As soon as the words left the man's mouth, Makino made the quickest exit she could, tears streaming down her face. After the green-haired woman had gone, the bar suddenly seemed to freeze. The air all around had gained a heavy feel, as if there was weight to it now. Shanks' crew had grown accustomed to the feeling, knowing what it was, but this time it felt slightly different, weaker even, and no one understood why. Higuma suddenly felt as if he couldn't breathe. Air simply wouldn't flow through his lungs and he began to sweat. Hearing loud thumps behind him, he turned to find every single one of his men unconscious on the floor. Something's wrong, Higuma thought to himself. What the hell was happening to everyone? Why couldn't he breathe? It felt like something was weighing him down and it was getting heavier by the second. Shanks stood to his feet and his whole crew could see what was coming. The fool of a mountain bandit had just made the last mistake he would ever make. No one insulted Shanks' friends. That's why, when Luffy walked from behind their captain and stood in front of him, the crew members of the red-haired pirates were all shocked senseless. With a dark look in his eye, Luffy met Higuma's gaze. No one hurts my friends. With every word the small boy spoke, the weight in the room continued to grow heavier. First, you smash a bottle on Shanks, and then, you call my big sister that word? Luffy's gaze was piercing and his voice lowered once more, tone darkening even further. Take it back, right, now. Higuma, his body and mind being unable to withstand the strength of Luffy's will, collapsed with blood flowing from his nose and ears. The silence that permeated through the bar was deafening. No one spoke until the first bandits began to pick themselves up off of the ground, shocked to find their leader lying on the floor in a small puddle of his own blood. Grab your leader's body and leave. If you ever come back to this place again, it's not the kid you'll have to worry about, the red-haired captain said in a voice barely above a whisper, flashing his eye toward the remaining men. While the bandits felt no power this time, the gaze seemed just as dangerous if not more so. They quickly gathered Higuma's still warm body and left as fast as humanly possible, fear practically rolling off of them in waves. Once the door was closed and the pirates were alone, silence settled in the bar, once again. A few seconds passed and it was broken by a slight sniffling. Shanks, what? I didn't, what did I? Luffy, how about me and you go out for a little bit, huh? Shanks asked in the lightest possible tone. Not trusting his voice at the moment, the shaking boy just nodded his head and the two proceeded to walk out of the bar, leaving a group of shell-shocked pirates to clean up the aftermath. The sun was beginning to set as the two made their way out of the door, Luffy clinging to the young captain as if his life depended on it. Seeing as the boy wasn't going to be talking anytime soon, Shanks took a deep breath and decided to start. A long time ago, I was a kid maybe a couple of years older than you. He paused and looked at Luffy as they kept walking. Unlike you, however, I was the cabin boy on a pirate ship, along with another kid. He paused again, memories of his old ship and crewmates playing in his head, bringing a soft smile to his lips. The redhead shook the thoughts away and continued, his smile still firmly in place. My captain was an amazing man, Luffy, and someone I admired greatly. I wanted to be just like him. Not just because he was strong, and trust me he was, but because of the way he lived. He was the freest man alive and the people he called friends weren't just that, they were family to him. I see that in you, too. You're only 7 years old and I can still see some similarities between the two of you. Getting down to his knee, Shanks stopped the black-haired boy and looked him in the eyes as he continued. Luffy, I want you to know that there's nothing wrong with protecting your friends. I know you don't understand what happened tonight but, please, believe me when I say this. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You, a 7-year-old boy, did more to protect Makino's name than I did. The man hung his head in shame, and I'm a full-blown pirate captain. I didn't just do it for Makino, came the 7-year-old's soft voice. Shanks perked back up at the words. What do you mean? He asked. I don't know exactly what I did, but I did it for you too, Shanks, Luffy said. Hearing those words come from the young boy's mouth, Shanks' breath caught in his throat and for a split second instead of Luffy standing in front of him, it was his old captain. It was strange, while he'd gotten to know the kid well over the course of his stay on the island, it wasn't as if he'd spent enough time to know him as well as he knew Roger. So why was he seeing it so clearly? The picture of goal. D. Roger was practically superimposed behind the boy in front of him. Whatever it was, whatever the feeling meant, Shanks had already decided that he would see it through. I couldn't just stand there and watch him do that to you, Shanks, I couldn't. It made me so mad. There was a small pause before he began again, a slight quiver returning to his voice. Shanks. Am I a bad person? I could tell that he was, that I kill. Luffy, personally I've never lost sleep over killing someone. Shanks interrupted, seeing the spiral the boy was about to go down. However, I never take pride or find joy in it. I don't like killing, but sometimes it is necessary to protect the things and people closest to your heart. So, no Luffy. You're not a bad kid. I don't think you have it in you to be a bad person, you're too earnest. Anchor. He finished, a smirk on his face to go with the attempt at lightening the mood. It was one of the few times the boy had managed to stay quiet for more than 30 seconds, and it was obvious on his face that Shanks' words had hit home. Shanks, what does it mean to be a pirate? Asked Luffy with a thoughtful look, trying to change the subject. He didn't want to think about the stupid bandit anymore. It was an interesting question, and not one Shanks was expecting in the moment. He thought about it for a second before answering honestly. Well, Luffy, that question has a lot of different answers, depending on who you ask. For me, I became a pirate to be free to do anything I wanted, to drink, to fight, and most importantly, to chase my dreams. When Luffy heard the man mention freedom, he immediately knew he wanted nothing. He wanted to be able to sail the seas and go on adventures with people he met along the way. He wanted to make friends. He wanted to be strong, to be able to protect those friends. He wanted to be free, to do what he wanted when he wanted to do it. And lastly, he decided that he wanted to be the one to find the One Piece. Not to stand at the top and look down on the people below him, but because the Pirate King was the freest person in the world. Slowly but surely, one could see Luffy's resolve harden, and even though it might take him time to truly come to terms with what had happened in the bar, he had made a decision. A decision that would unknowingly determine and shape him into the person he would one day become. He was going to live his life the way he wanted and protect the people he cared for at any cost. He was going to be the freest person in the world. He had a dream and he was going to make it come true. He was going to become the king of the pirates. With his resolve set in stone, the black-haired boy began to think back to the bar, and now that the fear and sadness of taking a life had taken a backseat to his new revelation, curiosity was all that was left. Shanks, can you tell me what happened in the bar? I still don't really understand, Luffy asked after a second of silence. Now was where things got complicated. How in the world was Shanks supposed to explain the concept of haky to a 7-year-old boy? Shit. I can't just leave him like this, he thought to himself. If Luffy couldn't control his conqueror's haky, it was bound to come out again, which would just confuse the kid even more, and with his first burst being as strong as it was, it could definitely lead to someone dying again. Would he teach him everything? The man thought about it for a moment before deciding that he wouldn't. Haky wasn't even supposed to exist outside of the Grand Line, and even then, it was mostly found in the New World. Plus, Luffy was only 7 and it wasn't like he could really learn how to use armament or observation by the time they left. He guessed he'd have to explain Conqueror's haky and help him with keeping it reined in. Can't have it coming out unintentionally, he thought, tuning back in just before Luffy next spoke. Oh, and what was that black stuff on your head, when you got hit earlier? The boy asked offhandedly. Shit. Whatever might you mean, my young friend? I'm sure I don't know what you could possibly be talking about, Shanks said, whistling, not suspiciously in the slightest. At this point, sweat was beginning to pour off the man. The current situation was becoming more of a handful than he originally thought. Liar! Luffy screamed. You never talk like that to me. You always call me Anchor or Brat. You're definitely hiding something, Shanks. Tell me, the 7-year-old yelled with an expression of absolute determination. He was going to find out if it was the last thing he did. At this point, Shanks had refused to let him become a pirate, and now the man was lying to his face? Laughter immediately broke through Shanks' lips at the expression on the young boy's face. Look at your face. It's so scrunched up. That is too good, Anchor. Luffy could only kick at the laughing man who, at this point, was on the ground holding his stomach. Eventually, Shanks was able to regain his breath and sat up. Before answering, the man took a good long look at the kid in front of him. He just couldn't help but see the similarities between his own former captain and the young boy. After several seconds had passed, he made his decision. Who was he kidding? There was never a decision to begin with. Alright, fine. I'll tell you, but listen to me, Luffy, this is very important. The power I'm about to tell you about doesn't exist in this ocean, and there are people out there that will hurt you to keep it that way. He warned. A part of Shanks was worried about Luffy being targeted, mainly by the government. However, so long as the kid could somewhat keep a secret, he imagined it would probably be fine. So he justified it the way he always did. He was a pirate. Pirates did what they wanted. Therefore, the black stuff you saw on my head earlier and what you did to that bandit are both different versions of the same power, haky. The version I used is essentially using your spirit to make something hard, and it's summoned by force of will. With me so far? Asked Shanks. He thought he explained it as simply as he could. And yet as his eyes rose from Luffy's to the boy's head, he saw smoke rising. So it's a mystery power. Luffy replied, blankly staring at the red-haired man. You damn brat. Of course not, Shanks screamed with shark teeth. Once again taking another deep breath and realizing that explaining haky to a 7-year-old might be harder than he expected, Shanks continued again, pointing at his arm. Alright, Luffy, what do you see? Confused, the boy took a closer look at Shanks' arm. It didn't look any different, but before backing away and saying that, he touched it. It felt strange to him, like it was harder than it should be. There was something there, but he had no idea what it was. Why the heck does your arm feel like that? He questioned. Well, Luffy, this is what is called armament haky, and this version of it is called enhancement. Using enhancement on your body allows you to hit harder and, vice versa, take more hits as well. Like you said before, when using this version most people won't even notice because the appearance of your skin doesn't change. Also, like I said before, it's summoned by force of will, and the stronger your willpower the easier it is to use. Shanks explained. The amount of smoke pouring from Luffy's head began to increase from his brain being overloaded. He was definitely going to need a repeat of the information at some point. However, Shanks had said it was important, so he was really trying to listen. One thing was still on his mind more than anything, though. But Shanks, your arm isn't black like your head was. He pointed out, hoping for an explanation. In reply, Shanks' arm began to glow red, creating a strange vibrating sound. The red glow suddenly popped out of existence, leaving the entire limb, from the elbow down, covered in a midnight black metallic sheen. Very good of you to notice, Luffy. Whoa! The 7-year-old yelled with stars in his eyes. So cool, what did you do that time? Can you teach me? Slow your roll, kid. Shanks laughed. He should have expected the boy to be pretty excited. He was a bit older than Luffy when he actually started learning haky, but he remembered the awe of seeing it for the first time when he was younger. I guess I'm gonna have to teach you the basics of armament now, as well as the other form you used. But only the basics, and I'm not teaching you the last form either. Where would the fun in that be? He teased. The words made Luffy frown to himself. Lame old geezer, he whispered under his breath. Geezer? Geezer? I'm only 27? I am not a geezer, HMPH. Maybe I shouldn't even teach you at all if you're gonna be ungrateful. The older man pouted, crossing his arms. No, Shanks, I'll behave. I promise, begged the young boy. Yeah, I know you will, Anchor, I'm just messing with you, Shanks laughed before getting on with the impromptu lesson. First of all, the difference between enhancement and the other version is enhancement would be like covering your arm in a sheet of metal. It makes it hard, but only on the outside. Can you take a guess as to what the other version might do? He asked. Luffy thought long and hard, but his 7-year-old brain just couldn't think of a good answer. What could be better than covering your skin in metal? Just as he was about to give up and ask Shanks for the answer, it hit him. The only thing better than covering yourself in metal is to be the metal. Does the other version make the inside metal too? Luffy asked. Excitedly, visions of cyborgs and robots flowing through his brain. Honestly, Donna get there. Shanks thought to himself, slightly impressed. Although it technically wasn't metal, if it made sense to Luffy then it worked for him. Very good, Luffy. Now, before we can talk more about armament, we need to talk about the form of haky you used. This type is called Conqueror's Haky, he stated in an ominous tone. The man took a deep breath, thinking of the best way to go about the conversation before, metaphorically, diving into the deep end. All right, Luffy, He began, I know you don't want something like what happened tonight to happen again, so I need you to listen very closely. Shanks would be lying if he said he wasn't nervous about teaching a 7-year-old conqueror's haky. He was basically giving a child a loaded gun, or a bomb. But at this point, what choice did he have? It's not like he could leave the kid out to dry, especially now that he'd gotten to know the little anchor. He imagined what he felt for Luffy was similar to what his captain had felt for him. With that in mind, the man continued, it's alright if you don't understand completely right now. I'll make sure it's stuck in that empty head of yours. Real good before I leave. Too excited to learn about the cool mysterious power, Luffy didn't even register the insult and nodded his head enthusiastically. Very few people can do what you did tonight, Luffy. Actually, it's probably about 1 in a million. Essentially, users of Conqueror's haky can force their will onto other people. This will affect these people based on their willpower in comparison to yours. Just as Luffy made to interrupt, Shanks put up his hand and stopped him. I know you're going to have questions, Luffy, but try and wait until I'm finished and then I'll answer anything you ask. The conversation that followed had Luffy's head smoking once again, but he paid attention because he knew it was important, holding his tongue until Shanks finished explaining. After the explanation, the man answered any questions the boy had until his curiosity was sufficiently satisfied. With the conversation put on hold for the moment, the two walked in peaceful silence until right before they walked back into the bar. Before Luffy could reach for the doors, Shanks stopped and the 7-year-old turned in curiosity. Luffy, I need you to promise me something. Can you do that? The red-haired man asked seriously. Of course I can, Shanks, Luffy replied. This won't matter so much with armament haky because it is easy to hide enhancement. It might be a problem if you learn the other form of it down the road, but that's for later. Shanks started. He wasn't too worried about the Navy discovering that Luffy could use the power he was going to teach him. As he had said before, enhancement was easy to hide and Luffy would have to have a real knack for haky to reach hardening before he got to the Grand Line, especially if he didn't leave the island before then. While not impossible, the man didn't think that it was likely. The only real problem, in Shanks' mind, was Conqueror's haky. Luffy, even though I'm going to teach you to control your Conqueror's haky, I need you to promise me that you will only ever use it as a last resort or unless you're sure no one will be around to see you. The red-haired man said. He had to let the kid have some fun with it, after all. At least, until you make it to the second half of the Grand Line. That is, if you're still gonna be a pirate. Shanks finished, feeling something from Luffy as soon as the words left his mouth. After checking the immediate area for any auras other than himself, the rest of his crew in the bar, and the boy in front of him and finding none, Shanks got curious. Let's see what you got, kid, he thought to himself. Of course I am Shanks. And not just any pirate. Luffy looked to the sky, completely oblivious to the power bubbling beneath his skin, and screamed, I'm gonna be the king of the pirates. Shanks felt the pressure immediately as he stood there, seemingly unfazed by the torrent of willpower exuding from Luffy. Not bad. Not bad at all, he thought. He never expected to see such potent conqueror's haky from someone so young. The child in his presence would be a real monster when he was older. The red-haired man stood stock still as Luffy's power ran its course, impressed with the young boy, not that Luffy ever even noticed. And why, might I ask, do you want to be the king, huh? Shanks asked after the burst had completely settled. Luffy thought for a moment before answering. Well, you said the king of the pirates was the freest man in the world, right? I want that. I want to be free to do whatever I want. Freer than anyone, even you, and most importantly, it sounds like a pretty cool adventure, right? And you said that one of your favorite things about being a pirate was going on adventures with your crew. So I'm gonna find an amazing crew and we are gonna go on all kinds of adventures together. Freer than me, huh? Shanks asked with a teasing smile. You know, that means you'll have to beat me one day. You bet your tomato-headed butt I'm gonna beat you one day, yelled Luffy, sticking his tongue out at the red-haired man. You're 100 years too young to be saying shit like that to me, brat. Shanks yelled back even louder. However, he couldn't help the smile the kid brought to his face and so he did just that. He smiled and asked once again, so, you promise? You won't use it unless it's the last thing you can do or no one else is around to see? If you went around using it all the time when you start your journey, the Navy might take notice and try to cut your trip short and we definitely don't want that, do we? Nah. Stupid Navy won't be stopping my adventures, I promise, Shanks, Luffy exclaimed. The man continued smiling, dropping to kneel in front of Luffy. Well then, in regards to your earlier declaration, I want to give you something. Slowly, he reached up to his head, pulling off the straw hat he wore everywhere, and, to the shock of the young boy in front of him, placed it on his head. This hat was given to me by someone I greatly admired, Luffy. It's my treasure, but I think he would have wanted me to give it to you. The pirate captain removed his hand from the now straw-hatted boy's head. Hold on to it for me, and when you become a great pirate, you can give it back. Think of it like a promise to meet again after my crew and I leave this island. All Luffy could do was stand there and accept Shanks' gift, not trusting his own voice in fear of crying again. Thank you, Shanks, for talking to me and for this, he said after a second, pointing to his new hat. I promise I'll get it back to you someday. Well, I don't expect that for a long while, so how about this? My crew and I will be here for around 4 more months. In that time I'll teach you the basics of armament haky and how to control your conqueror's haky, but never forget your promise. Got it? The red-haired man asked. I got it, Shanks, the child exclaimed. Shanks smiled at the young boy's excitement. All right. Every day for the next couple of months, you and I are going to the mountains to train. My crew can take care of getting things that we need around the East Blue for our departure. I hope you're ready for Hell Anchor, 'cause I certainly won't make this easy. I'm ready, Shanks. I'm gonna be super strong by the time you leave, and then, I'm gonna get even stronger after that, shouted Luffy enthusiastically. I know you will, Anchor, I know you will, mused the redhead, reaching to push the doors of the bar open. Oh, I remember now, exclaimed Luffy, making the man pause in the opening of said door. Shanks turned back, curiously. Remember what, Anchor? I wanted to ask you why that weird fruit in the cooled treasure chest talks. Luffy answered innocently. Not for the first time that night, Shanks' world froze. Shit, he whispered to himself. What's wrong, Shanks? Luffy asked, not understanding the shock that had taken over. The red-haired man backed away from the door and grabbed the boy's arm, before once again running off. Luffy didn't really understand what had spooked the pirate captain, but decided he should probably just go along with it. Once the two had made it to a place Shanks had determined safe, he sat Luffy down. The straw-hatted boy could tell something serious was coming, so decided to stay quiet and wait for the man to start. Luffy, I need you to tell me exactly what you heard, Shanks said, seriously. Luffy nodded his head and proceeded to tell him how he got bored and wanted to see what was in the chest. He told him how the fruit was saying, "Eat me." And when his hand got close to it, it started saying it really loud. The 7-year-old didn't understand what was going on, but after he finished, he could tell Shanks was deep in thought. Luffy was correct. The redhead was thinking deeply. It had to be it. The voice of all things. His captain had never said anything about being able to hear devil fruits, but with Luffy, why was he even surprised? This shit just got way complicated. He mused with an inward groan. Luffy, remember how I told you that you need to keep your conqueror's haky a secret and only ever use it if there's no other option? Asked Shanks. The boy nodded his head yes. Well, this is just like that, but even more important, Luffy. You may be one of the very few people in the world that can hear that voice, the pirate captain stated seriously. The young boy was extremely surprised at that. He might be one of the only ones? Shanks sighed. I don't know exactly why you can hear that voice, Luffy. I only have suspicions, but this is something that needs to stay between you and me, okay? That is until you are older and meet people you can trust with your life. But until then, you can't tell anyone, okay? This is extremely important and I need you to promise me. A little white lie wouldn't hurt the kid. He didn't have time to mess around with advanced forms of observation haky right now. Luffy would just have to figure it out on his own. Now it was the straw-hatted boy's turn for his eyes to widen. Shanks wouldn't ask him to promise unless it was really serious, like with the haky stuff. Okay, Shanks, I promise, Luffy said. The redhead nodded at Luffy's confirmation, taking a moment to gather his thoughts before he began. Alright Luffy, I'm gonna tell you a story before we head back to the bar. It's about my old captain and his ability to hear, the voice of all things. Chapter 2, An Early Start. 9 years later, 2 years had passed since Luffy's older brother, Ace, had left the island to pursue his dream of becoming a pirate, and Luffy now stood at the same place he had seen him off from, preparing to start his own small journey for the next year. Well, a little less than a year now. As he stood before the sight in front of him, he couldn't help but grow excited. The waters of the sea were a vibrant blue, reflecting the sun and the clouds in the sky. It was the perfect day to start his journey. The thought brought his brother's departure through his mind. It had been a colder day, but just as beautiful. "Bye, Ace!" Luffy screamed from the land as he watched his brother's boat leave the port. "Bye, Luffy. Come find me once you set out to sea. I'm bound to be a super big pirate by then. You're gonna have a lot to live up to being my kid brother," yelled Ace in return, his boat continuing to grow smaller and smaller in the distance. The memory crept through the teen's mind fondly as he stood at the docks preparing himself for the start of his journey. No, not his pirate journey, his journey around the East Blue. Luffy knew that the moment he turned 17, he would set out, gather a crew, and enter the Grand Line, the greatest stretch of ocean of them all. So, before that, he wanted to see the East Blue and get some experience on the waters around his home beforehand, because, like it or not, he'd never actually been off of the island. Over the past 9 years, Luffy had grown much. No longer was he a little, helpless, 7-year-old boy. The teen stood at a height of 5'6" and he certainly still had more room to grow. His face was slightly round, bearing a scar just under the left eye, and his eyes and hair matched both a dark black. Most would probably say he looked plain, but that was largely due to his age. He was still young, after all. With time to fill out and mature, Luffy would, eventually, become the apple of many eyes. The boy's body was on the smaller side, but very lithe and muscular, like a coiled viper ready to strike. A pair of blue jean shorts and an open red vest was his signature outfit at this point in life, along with his hat and sandals. His treasure could be seen atop his head, the yellow of the straw gleaming in the sunlight and contrasting beautifully with the red of the sash sitting on the hat's brim. The last thing of note on Luffy's person was a beautiful brown cord around his neck. The cord was braided from several different strands of leather into a loop. The loop was tied around Luffy's neck to the point that he couldn't remove it over his head, but not so tight as to choke him. It was comfortable. Over the years, no matter how much he grew, the cord always seemed to fit perfectly. He, however, had never taken any real notice of it. The last detail on the necklace was a vibrant violet jewel that seemed almost woven into the leather through the stem of whatever the stone depicted. There were no other ornaments accenting the piece of jewelry. Nothing more was needed. The gleaming purple gemstone was plenty beautiful on its own. At 16 the boy had, what he would call, a mastery of hand-to-hand combat. The claim came from spending so much time with his brothers. Where his brothers took to pipes as their weapon of choice, Luffy used his fists. They each fought 100 times every day and hunted the large animals of the local mountain forest. Ace and Luffy even continued after the death of their last brother, Sabo. The death of their late brother was sudden and affected the two children more than anything had in their entire lives. During that period, their spirits were under much duress and there were times when they both felt continuing on without him would be pointless, times when the guilt of being so powerless was overwhelming. However, they pushed on because that's what Sabo would have wanted. The basics of haky Luffy learned at the tender age of 7 ended up leaning more towards Conqueror's haky. He found he had quite the affinity for it, according to Shanks. Because of that, however, the basics of armament enhancement were slightly rushed. Most of the learning he did with enhancement came after Shanks had left the island. With not a lot to go on, the boy had to teach himself based on feel and instinct, and Luffy liked to think it had turned out all right. He was now able to enhance his entire body at the same time. However, as he trained over the years, Luffy noticed that spreading his enhancement across his body drained him more than if he used it on a single body part or a smaller area of himself. Also, Shanks hadn't explicitly mentioned how to use the black form of haky, but he did say that new forms of haky were extremely hard to unlock without a situation that pushed the wielder to or past their limits. Situations Luffy had seen few of over the years. Therefore, even though his haky was strong, chances were, he wouldn't unlock hardening until he left the island. Conqueror's haky was a different story due to the fact that it grows with its user. Luffy rarely ever used it because of his promise to Shanks, however, it had continued to grow over the years as the boy had grown and, even in its dormancy, had become much stronger. Putting his fingers to his mouth, Luffy gave a sharp whistle out to the sea, the water beginning to ripple in response. The ripples continued to grow larger as they gravitated toward the dock. The closer they came, the darker the water seemed to get, almost as if the silhouette of a sea monster was rising out of the water. In actuality, that's exactly what it was. The Lord of the Coast's head burst through the surface of the blue liquid, sending water in every direction as its red eyes met the black of Luffy's. There was silence as the beast moved, coming closer and closer to the docks. By the time it stopped, the two were so close that Luffy would have been able to touch the sea monster. To no one's surprise, that's exactly what he did. Reaching up to the massive head of the beast, the boy lightly patted its nose and was nuzzled back in return. "You ready, Levi?" he asked the creature. The large sea beast named Levi nodded its head excitedly, ready to begin its journey with its master. Turning to look back up at the island he was about to leave, Luffy spoke once again. "Take a good long look, Levi. We aren't coming back here for a while," he said to his companion, smiling. This was his home, he would be back eventually. Where else was he supposed to start his pirate adventure from? "All right," he exclaimed. "Remember, Levi, no helping unless I absolutely need it. I need to get stronger and that's why we're doing this." Once more gazing at the place he'd always called home, he gave it one last good look before turning away with a grin. "Let's go," the teen yelled, diving headfirst into the water. Before the two started swimming, Luffy grabbed a hold of the large beast and asked a question. "Hey, you're a sea monster, so you've probably been all around the East Blue, right?" The beast nodded its head. "So how about this? You lead the way and I'll swim beside you. Take us to the closest island and when I can't go any farther, I'll rest on your head until I can swim again," the boy explained. "Sound good?" With a final nod of its large head, the two set off toward the next island, swimming side by side. "Meet!" The scream was heard throughout the town, making all heads turn toward the port. The scene there was something most of the townspeople could only gawk at. A boy, no more than 16, was riding on top of some sort of sea monster. "Meat! Give me meat!" Luffy screamed. Like a man possessed, he jumped from Levi's head and proceeded to swim toward the docks at speeds that, while maybe not as fast as a fishman, were definitely faster than most humans. After making it to the dock and pulling himself up, the teen turned back to the sea. "Levi, stay around the island and listen for my whistle. I don't know how long I'll be here, so go have some fun, but don't go too far." Away from his friend and facing the town again, Luffy sighed. "Now that that's taken care of, meat!" he screamed as he ran through the town looking for a restaurant. "Someone give me meat! I haven't eaten in forever. I don't even know how long it's been." Moving faster than most eyes could keep up with, Luffy twisted and turned throughout the streets until he finally found it. A bar. Stars appeared in the boy's eyes as he blasted off towards the establishment, so fast in fact, that he couldn't quite stop himself before he made it to the doors. Inside the bar a young man of 18 sat drinking peacefully, minding his own business. He wore a tight beige-white shirt that showed off the muscle he'd acquired over the years and a pair of dark green pants. Around his stomach was a light green striped haramaki and on his left bicep was a tied bandana, the same color as his pants. He had short light green hair and tan skin. The lighter colors of his skin and shirt contrasted with the dark black of his eyes and the gold of the 3 teardrop-shaped earrings hanging from his left ear. At his hip, curiously, were 3 katanas tucked into his haramaki, the only one of note bearing a white hilt and a similarly colored sheath. It rested in the middle of the 2 other blades and it was obvious that the young man cared more for this sword than the other 2 with the way he rested his hand on its pommel. The teenager had been drifting ever since he left his home and paid for all of his expenses through his job, so to speak. He originally left to pursue his dream, as well as keep a promise to a dear friend, to become the greatest swordsman in the world. However, soon after he left his village, Shimotsuki, he realized that he couldn't find his way back and was essentially lost. Not that he would ever admit it. Because of his situation, he turned to bounty hunting as a way to sustain himself while journeying across the East Blue. Even if he was a bounty hunter, however, the money wasn't very important to him. Yes, it let him buy food and a bed in most places, but that didn't matter in his eyes. His true goal was to become stronger, so he could one day challenge the man who stood at the top of the ladder he was trying to climb. Dracul Mahawk, otherwise known by his epithet, hawk eyes. Meat. It was the last thing the bounty hunter heard before the saloon-esque doors to the bar were practically blasted off their hinges. Unsheathing two of his swords, he began to prepare for the worst as he turned to see what caused the commotion. Meat. Give me meat. I'm about to starve to death, Luffy screamed from his position on the floor. He could smell it. Someone was cooking something and that something smelled delicious. Getting up and once again sprinting his way to the bar to order some of the delicious-smelling meat, Luffy didn't even notice the green-haired swordsman holding two very sharp swords. Before he could make it all the way to the bar, the taller boy blocked his path, stepping in front of him and forcing him to stop to avoid a collision. Hey, what the hell? Get out of my way so I can get some of that delicious meat, Luffy screamed in the stranger's face. He wasn't even fazed from crashing through those doors. The Verde thought to himself. Most people would have still been on the ground in pain, but the kid didn't even have a scratch. He eyed the straw-hatted boy critically. He was obviously no swordsman, but for some reason, the Verde just couldn't help but think he would be fun to fight. He glanced back at the broken doors and smirked. It looked like he had found a strong one. Fight me, he demanded. No, I just said get out of my way so I can eat some meat, Luffy screamed back before trying to make his way around the stupid guy trying to keep him from eating. As soon as he tried to move, however, he found a sword at his throat. The swordsman held his blade steadily, trying to hold his grin at bay. I said, fight me, he demanded once more. Trying to calm down before he broke the person in front of him in two, Luffy asked, and why would I fight you? I'm hungry. Plus I don't even know you. I have zero reasons to fight you right now, so, move it. Well, if it's about knowing each other, my name is Roronoa Zoro. Plus, you don't look like the type of guy to carry around money with him, am I right? The older boy replied, seeing an opportunity. Yeah, so? Luffy answered, not realizing why it mattered. Well, usually when you want to eat food, you've got to pay for it, Zoro answered, smirking as he saw the look of realization come across Luffy's face. The expression was very similar to that of someone who'd just been told a loved one had died. So how about this? You fight me, and if you win I'll buy you as much food as you want. Deal? The older boy more suggested than questioned. Luffy's expression changed so fast it could have given the whole bar whiplash. Deal? Come on, let's go fight right now. I'm hungry, damn it. He turned toward the entrance he had blown apart and excitedly ran out of it. He would do just about anything for food right now. Zoro could only smirk at the boy as he followed him out of the bar. It looked like his name wasn't quite famous enough to be known yet. However, many bounties had already fallen to his blades. He may even have to go easy on the kid. He didn't really know how strong the seemingly younger boy was, but there was one thing he was 100% certain of. He wouldn't be paying for anything today. The rest of the bar gaped in silence as the two exited the establishment. What exactly had they just watched? The two walked in silence until they made it out of the town, to a nearby clearing where they stopped and faced each other. Alright kid, I gave you my name, I'd like to know the name of the person I'm about to beat down. Care to share? Zoro asked with a smirk. Luffy smiled at the question. My name's Monkey D. Luffy and I'm gonna be the king of the pirates. He yelled, now come on, let's fight. Alright then, if you're gonna make such a declaration, I guess I gotta state my ambition too. He looked Luffy in the eyes. My name is Roronoa Zoro and I will be the greatest swordsman in the world. A slightly familiar feeling came across Luffy and his eyes widened by a fraction. Was that, before he could finish the thought, however, his brain registered Zoro's declaration and his eyes turned to stars. That is so cool. The greatest in the world? You got to join my pirate crew. The swordsman stayed silent for a moment before replying. I have no intention of becoming a pirate. I will only ever pursue my goal and nothing will get in the way of that, he stated sternly. Ah, come on. We could go on really cool adventures, and there has to be some super strong people to fight on the Grand Line. I know you probably want to get stronger, so do I. What better place to do it than there? Luffy exclaimed. Sorry kid, it ain't gonna happen. I told you I won't let anyone or anything get in the way of my dream. Zoro replied with finality. If there were strong people on the Grand Line, he would go there on his own eventually. The two stared at each other for a moment after the Verde's refusal. I refuse. Luffy stated simply. Zoro gaped at the words. You can't just refuse me, I just refused you, he screamed, teeth turning to those of a shark. "Well, I'm refusing your refusal. Now come be a pirate with me. You can be my first mate," the straw-hatted teen argued. "Well, you can be my first mate, later." "Who the hell do you think you are? You can't refuse a refusal. And what does that even mean?" the swordsman yelled in exasperation. "Well, I just did," said Luffy, sticking his tongue out at the older boy and ignoring all of his questions. Zoro'd had enough, he just wanted to fight. "Alright, I'll make you another deal. If you manage to beat me, somehow, I'll join your pirate crew, or whatever. Happy now?" he questioned with a huff. "Yes, alright. Let's do this," Luffy screamed. He then saw his opponent 3 katanas in his belly warmer. "Are you gonna use all 3 of those?" he questioned, pointing at the swords, one still sheathed. The sheen of Zoro's blades sounded into the air as they left their sheaths. "Yes, I practice a style that uses 3 swords. Santoryu," he stated. "That is so cool, you're definitely joining my crew," Luffy screamed, excitedly. The guy was just too cool not to have on his crew. 3 swords. Cool. Dreamed of being the world's greatest swordsman? Cool. Green hair? Cool. Belly warmer? He somehow even made that look cool too. The Verde chose to stare at Luffy instead of answering, a blank look on his face. It was almost as if he hadn't even heard Luffy say anything. "Rules are if you get knocked out or surrender, you lose," Zoro clarified, ignoring Luffy's exclamation and drawing his 3rd blade. He unraveled his dark green bandana from his bicep, tying it around his head, and placed his white-hilted katana in his mouth. "Got it?" he mumbled, through his sword. "Shut up and let's fight already. You're really cool and are gonna join my crew. Plus, I'm starving, damn it," Luffy screamed, jumping toward his opponent. His fist came flying toward Zoro's face and on instinct the swordsman blocked. 2 swords coming together in the center to stop the incoming fist. As metal and skin impacted, Zoro could only gape at the sound reverberating from the clash. That didn't sound like skin at all. He thought to himself incredulously. Just what the hell was the kid made of? Quickly coming out of his shock, Zoro pushed back against the boy's fist, attempting to create some distance between the two of them. He was shocked senseless once again when he realized that not only could he not push his opponent back, he was the one being pushed back. He jumped away from the clash, coming to the realization that he couldn't overpower his foe, before immediately rushing forward once more with a yell, "Tiger Hunt!" Expecting Luffy to dodge, Zoro slashed as fast as he possibly could, trying to see if what he lacked in strength he could make up with speed. Seeing the head-on attack coming, Luffy couldn't help but smirk as the swords came down with blinding speed. The blades sped toward Luffy and he brought his arms in front of his body in a cross-guard, jumping forward toward the swordsman. Blades met skin and created the strange sound, yet again confusing Zoro once more. His swords bounced off of the incoming guard, causing him to be left wide open, and the younger boy took the opportunity to plant a fist right in the middle of Zoro's chest, sending him flying back several feet. "Damn it! This kid is stronger than me," Zoro thought in a panic. He had severely underestimated his opponent. How was the kid blocking his swords? His arms should have been in pieces with those 2 strikes. Ignoring the pain in his chest from his opponent's retaliation, Zoro once again sprinted his way toward his foe and prepared for a fight much more grueling than he expected. The 2 teenagers moved faster than most eyes could up with as punches and slashes met each other one after another. Multiple blows were traded in the blink of an eye when, suddenly, Luffy sprang into the air and brought his heel down in the direction of the Verde's head. Zoro brought his blades up just in time to intercept the incoming blow, but struggled against the straw-hatted boy's strength as he seemingly hung in the air with all of his weight pushing downward. The swordsman pushed outward with every muscle he had, forcing Luffy into a backflip and overpowering him for the first time during the fight. He didn't even really have time to be happy about it, as Luffy was already sprinting back toward him. The Verde groaned to himself. What the hell had he gotten himself into? However, he couldn't help but grin at the same time. The battle-crazed smile the straw-hatted boy was wearing as he approached was infectious. The fight between the 2 teenagers continued for far longer than either of them had anticipated, and while it seemed like hours to the 2 fighters, it couldn't have been more than 10 minutes since the 2 began. Although Zoro was looking to be in worse shape, that didn't mean Luffy had taken no damage. Looking at the younger boy's arms, Several angry red slices could be seen along with various streaks of blood from where he'd continuously blocked Zoro's strikes. Even though Zoro hadn't cut his opponent very deep, he had made him bleed and he could be satisfied with that, for now. I'm going to end it with this move. No one has ever stayed conscious after seeing this technique. Be proud that you pushed me this far. He spoke through ragged breaths. Bring it, replied Luffy, just as exhausted, not taking his eyes off of his green-haired opponent. Crossing his arms so he had a sword pointing to the sky on either side of him, Zoro bent down as if about to rush forward. Santoryu. An ominous purple glow appeared in his eyes as he looked to Luffy. Demon cut. Faster than he had for the entire bout. Zoro burst forward and brought his swords to his opponent for one last strike. Knowing his enhancement wouldn't be able to save him from being cut severely, Luffy dodged to the left. While his superior speed did allow him to move before the slash hit, it did not let him avoid it completely and time seemed to slow down before his very eyes. Seeing where the one blade would connect, Luffy enhanced his right shoulder as much as he possibly could. Something inside of him just knew that it wasn't going to be enough. If he didn't do something, he was going to lose his arm. He needed more, way more. The teen continued to enhance his shoulder further and further as the blade continued its descent, screaming internally in exertion. He'd never forced his haky this far before and he still wasn't sure he'd be able to save his arm. Everything he had went into making his skin harder. Every ounce of willpower in his body. Absolutely, everything. Just as the sword was millimeters from Luffy's skin, a small dark gray spot, almost black, formed and it was just large enough to block the blade that would have taken his arm. Metallic ringing sounding into the air. The two teenagers looked each other in the eyes before both looking to the black-haired boy's shoulder, where Zoro's sword was being stopped. The blade had begun to crack along its edge, where it met the gray of Luffy's haky. He'd finally done it. Even through his exhaustion, Luffy was soaring. He'd been pushed further past his limits than he ever had before, and the one to thank was the opponent standing before him. Thank you, Zoro. If I hadn't met you, who knows how long it would have taken me to do that? The straw-hatted teen exclaimed before completing his move to the left, Zoro's sword falling from his shoulder. The Verde's only two reactions were confusion and panic. What the hell is this kid talking about? He thought to himself. How the hell had he done that? Just who was this guy? Taking advantage of his opponent's momentary lapse in concentration, Luffy pulled his fist back for one last strike, closing his eyes and concentrating. He began to recall the feeling that came with the new form of armament haky he had finally unlocked. He had seen the defensive capabilities, but now he wanted to see what it could do offensively. Focusing on his fist, he felt the skin on his front four knuckles harden just like his shoulder had. Without the impending doom of losing an arm, Luffy had time to really feel the difference between enhancement and the new form. He could feel his haky surging into the tops of his knuckle bones and the blood surrounding them along with the skin, creating the appearance of gray metal. The feeling was similar to enhancement, but just more. He finally opened his eyes and noticed that only his knuckles had the appearance of metal. He shrugged at the sight and looked up, addressing Zoro. It looked like he had a long way to go. Well, if you went all out, I guess it would be rude of me if I didn't. Smirking, Luffy only had one last thing to say forward to deliver a devastating right-handed punch. You might want to block. Eyes wide, Zoro brought his swords up as fast as he could, barely managing to do so in time. His opponent's fist was moving faster than he could see. Gray knuckles impacted the blades and shattered the two in his hands, the only one surviving being the one in his mouth. However, the same couldn't be said for his face. On contact, the swordsman felt his nose break as he went flying through the air, headed straight for the trunk of a tree. Instead of slamming against it, as anyone would expect, his body shattered the tree and he went straight through it. The Verde's body crashed through several more trees before being stopped by a large boulder, severely cracking it as he impacted. If he had been anyone else, he most likely either would have lost his head to that punch, or crashing through trees and hitting a boulder would have destroyed his body. Luckily though, he was Roronoa Zoro, and simply put, he was strong. Letting his hardening fade, Luffy struggled to stand, not realizing how much using his new form of armament would drain him. He had some training to do. The straw-hatted teen turned and looked at the destruction he'd caused, hoping his new crewmate was still alive. Maybe he should have held back a little. No, Zoro didn't seem like the kind of guy who would appreciate that. He relaxed when groaning could be heard coming from the place where said swordsman had landed. Hoping he didn't hurt his new crew member too badly, Luffy walked over to see if the other teen was alright. "Hey, you alive?" he asked the green-haired boy. Slowly, Zoro brought himself into a sitting position, ignoring the pain in his body. Before replying, he took a look at what was left of the two swords he was holding in his hands. "Damn, these are gonna need replacing at some point," he thought, proceeding to drop the handles to set his nose. He held it afterward to stop the bleeding, looking up at Luffy with a scowl. "No thanks to you. How the hell are you so strong?" he asked, reaching up to pull his bandana off. Luffy laughed and thought about how he'd gotten to this point. "I've pretty much been training for my entire life. Even coming here is part of my journey to get stronger before I set out to be a pirate." Zoro looked at Luffy in confusion. "So you're not a pirate?" "No, not yet. I made a promise with my brothers that we would all set off for our own journeys the day we turned 17. So, instead of just waiting around my village and training there for the next year, I thought that I would go around the East Blue and get some experience on the sea instead," the black-haired teen answered. As dense as this kid seems, that was actually pretty smart of him, the Verde thought to himself. "So you're not a pirate yet, but I'm guessing that part of the journey you're on right now is to find some crewmates for when you do set out?" he asked. Luffy's eyes widened at Zoro's question. "That's a great idea. Why didn't I think of that?" The swordsman could only sweat drop at the kid. "He may be denser than I originally thought." Sighing, he stood from his sitting position before addressing the boy he would apparently be calling his captain sometime in the future. "Listen, I won't let anything stand in the way of my ambition, not even you. I'll join your crew, but if you ever get in the way of me achieving my dream, I will not hesitate to put you down, permanently." Zoro stared Luffy down, waiting for his reaction. "Yes. My first crew member, and he's gonna be the greatest swordsman in the world. The Pirate King would have no less on his crew," the future pirate captain yelled, pumping his fist in the air. Laughing at his future captain's antics, Zoro walked to where his white-hilted sword had fallen. Thankfully, as he examined it, there didn't seem to be any damage and placed the blade back in its sheath. He then began to make his way toward the town. After all, he did owe Luffy a meal. Zoro?" the black-haired boy queried. "What is it, Luffy?" the Verde replied, somewhat irritably. He was hungry, now, and he seriously needed some booze. "Where are you going?" he asked. "That's definitely not the way back to town." Zoro froze in place before turning around and walking in the opposite direction, acting as if nothing had happened. "Still not the right way." Luffy's sweat dropped. A tick mark appeared on Zoro's head as he turned around once again. "I knew that." Luffy tried to keep himself from laughing but gave up after realizing Zoro was headed in the same direction he was going in originally. "What the hell are you laughing at?" Zoro screamed at Luffy, as the younger boy rolled on the ground. "I can't help it, your sense of direction is just so bad," he managed to wheeze back through his laughter. The swordsman scowled. "It is not. The town must have moved or something." Sure, whatever you say," the younger boy replied, still rolling on the ground, taking a second to gather himself. Luffy stood before telling his new friend he knew the way back to town and signaling him to follow, turning to walk in that direction. Zoro glanced at his companion as he followed. He had just met him today, but he was glad that this was going to be his captain. Luffy knew how important people's dreams were to them because of how important his own was to himself. Because of that, even after only knowing him for less than a day, he had a feeling Luffy would never intentionally get in the way of his goal. On the contrary, he felt that just being around the straw-hatted boy would put him in situations that pushed him further than he may have been able to push himself. He didn't know if he would follow him forever, but he had a suspicion that if not, it would be for quite some time. What could he say? He liked the kid. The two didn't make it back to town for hours because even though Luffy said he knew the way back, his sense of direction wasn't much better than Zoro's. But eventually, they made it back to the bar they'd met in and had an extremely large meal, on Luffy's part, as well as drank more than either of them should be able to, most of the drinking being done by Zoro. A week had passed since the two had become future crewmates and they had yet to leave the island they were on, Yotsuba Island. Located in the Yotsuba Island region. They would have left earlier, but Luffy said they couldn't leave until Levi came back. When Zoro asked who Levi was, The younger boy just said that it was a surprise. The whole time they had been on the island, they explored, sparred, ate, drank, and that was about it. Ririka, the owner of the establishment they frequented in Shellstown, where they had been staying on the island, let them sleep in the back of the bar. There was also a bathroom where the two could shower, as well. Waking up on the 8th day of their stay, the two ate with Ririka and her 3-year-old daughter, Rika. The young girl adored the two boys and could usually be seen hanging off of one of them, while they were in the bar together. The four ate lunch in peaceful silence. Well, as peaceful as possible, with someone like Luffy at the table. The others were constantly guarding their plates to stop Luffy's wandering hands from snatching any of their food. Just as they were finishing their meal, the group heard a commotion from outside the bar and stood to check and see what it was. The group watched as a contingent of Navy soldiers led a handcuffed man past the bar windows. "Why's he got cuffs on?" Luffy asked curiously, watching the man being dragged through the street. "I dunno, your guess is as good as mine," Zoro replied, sifting through some papers he always kept on him. Ririka sighed at the sight. "That's been happening more recently," she said. "A lot of people are being executed for piracy these days." "Executed?" Luffy screamed suddenly. He turned to Zoro and jumped onto him, bringing their faces inches apart. "Zoro, can we please go, please? Get off of me, you in return," shoving the younger boy away from him. "Why are you even asking me? You're the captain. Also, why the hell do you even want to go watch? We're pirates just like him." Ririka's eyes immediately widened as she grabbed Rika and began to slowly back away. The two didn't seem like pirates to her. They were just kids. However, she couldn't deny what she'd just heard. "Shut up, Zoro. You're scaring the nice lady," Luffy exclaimed, shooting the green-haired boy a dirty look. "Don't worry, lady," he started, now addressing Ririka. "We aren't pirates," he said, his signature smile resting on his face. "Very convincing, Luffy." Zoro's sweat dropped, looking at the still, scared, Ririka and a very confused Rika. "What do you mean? We aren't?" Luffy argued incredulously. "I can't be a pirate for another year. And you're joining my crew, so you can't either. And I want to watch because I've never seen one before." Ririka listened to the conversation in confusion. "Wait. Now I'm confused. You aren't pirates. But you're going to be?" she questioned. She was just going to pretend she didn't hear what Luffy said about wanting to see an execution just because he'd never seen one before. Nope, she didn't hear it. What followed was a short and to-the-point explanation of what was going on with the two teenagers from said teenagers. Well, it would have been, if Luffy wasn't Luffy or Zoro actually cared. Luffy started telling a story that no one could really understand and took way too long. Ririka was lost the whole time until the end when he said he and his brothers promised to become pirates when they turned 17. That was pretty easy to understand. Hearing that, Ririka was relatively satisfied and no longer scared of the teens. She could see just how honest of a boy Luffy was. It wasn't really that difficult, he was absurdly earnest. To be fair, she wasn't really scared to begin with. There was just a stigma around pirates being bad people and she didn't want to associate with that. "I see. So you can't start your journey for another year. Well, a little less than that now, I guess." She smiled at the boy. "Thank you for telling me all that, Luffy. You've made me feel much better, although, I do think you may have missed the execution," Ririka said, secretly glad. No children of any age should have to witness something like that if they wanted to or not. Little did she know that both Luffy and Zoro had seen dark things in their young lives. The lengths people will go to for the sake of status and comfort. Human nature at its worst. The cruelty of the universe playing with things at its whim, taking before it is time and leaving the weight of what's lost on the ones who still carry their memory, their dreams. These two young men had already experienced much hardship in their short lives. However, instead of melting away under the heat of their experience, they were instead tempered by it and would be forever stronger because of it. In comparison, an execution was nothing to these two, not anymore. Ririka had nothing to worry about. Luffy shot up from his seat and sprinted out of the door towards the local marine base, Zoro in tow. As they came up to the gate, they could see the crowd thinning and people beginning to leave, signifying that, yes, they had indeed missed the execution. "Damn it, we missed it," the younger teen screamed and proceeded to fall to his knees, pounding the ground with his fist and creating cracks where it would impact. Zoro only looked on with a bored expression before grabbing the back of a sulking Luffy's vest and dragging him back toward the bar. "Thank you, Daddy. That idiot insulted me to my face. He deserved to die." The Verdade turned at the voice that had come from somewhere behind the wall, likely close to the base. After stopping for a second and deciding what to do, he turned back and chose to ignore it. Luffy was getting annoying to carry and he didn't care about some stupid idiot getting insulted. "Luffy, stop moping and get up, I'm not dragging you anymore, it's annoying," Zoro said with a scowl, dropping his future captain. Before the swordsman could say anything more, however, the other teen shot up from his position on the ground with wide eyes and a massive smile on his face. Without any word to his partner in crime, Luffy proceeded to blast off from his position on the ground, running in the direction of the port. "Hurry up, Zoro. I think he's back and that means it's time to go," Luffy yelled as he continued to get further and further away. Who the hell is he talking about? Zoro thought to himself. Well, there was no use sitting around. He might as well go and see who the idiot was so excited to see. Coming up on the port, Luffy could barely hold in his excitement. He hadn't seen his friend in a whole week. He was also getting antsy to go on some more adventures. As cool as the island had been, he was definitely happy about recruiting Zoro as his first mate. He was ready to go and see more of the East Blue and meet even more cool people. If only he hadn't missed the execution, that would have been the perfect end to his stay on the island. Oh well, once again, there was nothing he could do about it now. When he finally reached the dock, Luffy stuck his fingers in his mouth and gave a sharp whistle to call his friend, along with a loud shout of, "Levy." After waiting for just a moment, Luffy began to see familiar ripples in the water, signifying the sea monster's arrival. "Levi," he exclaimed, hugging the monster's nose as he came out of the water. "I missed you, buddy. I feel like I haven't seen you in forever. I've got so much to tell you. I met this really cool guy, who uses 3 swords, and we had this fight and he agreed to be pirates with me when I start on my journey. Isn't that cool? Oh, and, nope, that's about it. What about you, buddy? Did you have some fun while you were gone?" The sea beast nodded its head in confirmation. "Well, I'm glad," Luffy said with a smile. "We are getting ready to leave soon now that you're here, buddy. Oh, and you gotta meet Zoro. He's the swordsman I was telling you about. He uses 3 swords. How cool is that? Oh, and he wants to be the world's greatest swordsman and I told him I wouldn't have any less on my crew. It was really cool. Anyways, you can meet him when he gets here, even though he might take forever because he has no sense of direction. Then, we're gonna go to the bar, real quick, to get some food for the trip because I really don't want to be that hungry again." The boy took a deep breath after finishing, having not taken a single one while he was talking. "What in the hell is that?" Turning away from Levi, Luffy saw Zoro staring at him, frozen in place as his friend watched him speak to the giant sea monster. "Zoro, you're finally here." He quickly ran up to the swordsman and grabbed his arm, dragging him over to his large friend. The Verdade reluctantly followed, not really having much choice in the matter. As they neared, Zoro could hear the monster purr at him and stopped to tell Luffy, mistaking it for a growl, "Luffy, I don't think that thing likes me too much." "No way. Levi's my friend and you're my friend, so you two have to be friends," reasoned Luffy. "Firstly, I'm not sure that's how that works. Secondly, why the hell are you talking to a sea monster?" the young man screamed back with shark teeth. Luffy stared at Zoro blankly, not understanding the question. "He's my friend. Why else would I be talking to him?" He looked over at Levi and the beast simply nodded its head in agreement. "That's not what I..." Zoro paused for a second before seemingly giving up. "You know what, never mind. I don't even want to know." After introductions were over, if you could even call them that, Luffy and Zoro headed back to the bar to pick up their things and get food for the trip to the next island. Along the way, Luffy explained how Levi helped get him from island to island. Now that they could use Zoro's small boat as well, they would be able to Brindley's along. The two were a whirlwind as they swept through the bar, gathering all the things they would need for their voyage. It would put a small dent in what Zoro had saved up from bounty hunting, but neither of the teens felt good about just taking from Ririka, even though she probably wouldn't make too much of a fuss about it. Plus, what else was he going to spend it on, if not this? Oh yeah, he still needed some new swords. Eventually the two, hopefully, had everything they would need for their next voyage and made their way back to the port, Ririka and Rika in tow. "Do you really have to leave?" Rika asked, tears in her eyes. The two young men turned to look back at the girl following them, and both of their hearts broke at the expression on the young girl's face, even though Zoro would never admit it. "Rika, they have a journey to go on, you know that. Plus, I'm sure this won't be the last time you see them, isn't that right, boys?" The death glare Ririka was aiming at the two sent a shiver down their spines and left no room for argument, not that there would have been any in the first place. "Of course," Luffy shouted with a smile while Zoro nodded his head in agreement. "I don't know when we will be back, but I promise," Luffy looked the girl in the eyes, "we will be back someday, and when we do come back, we will have lots and lots of new stories to tell about all of our adventures. Sound good?" The girl nodded her head enthusiastically before rushing to the two boys and wrapping her arms around their legs in a hug. Luffy just laughed and hugged back, while Zoro awkwardly patted the girl's back, not used to such shows of affection. "Alright, Zoro, let's get a move on. I don't know where the next island we are going to is, but I can't wait to get there." Luffy jumped into the small boat before taking some rope and tying one end to the helm and the other into a large loop, throwing it into the water. The rope was immediately pulled under the surface, and just before the boat started moving, Zoro hopped in as well. "Bye, guys. Thanks for letting us stay at the bar. See you again someday," the straw-hatted teen yelled, waving back at the now quickly disappearing port. Rika and Ririka could only stare in shock at the boat sailing away at a pace much faster than should be possible. Eventually coming out of their stupor, they waved back before the small vessel completely disappeared, the two wondering how long it might be before they see the interesting teenagers again. Chapter 3, Upside Down. Zoro and Luffy traveled for the next week waiting for any sign of a new island. Along the way they both swam beside Levi, and Zoro was still wondering how in the world Luffy had managed to tame a sea monster. However, being who he was, he eventually decided he didn't care that much and would probably just ask when he felt like it. The two future crewmates swam beside the sea monster whenever they had the energy to, and when they didn't, they rested in the boat. They ate when they needed it but tried to save as much food as possible, not knowing how much longer they might be traveling. It was quite the feat considering who the future captain was. At first, Zoro had no clue as to why Luffy insisted on swimming with the sea monster as he did, but when he thought about it, the answer wasn't that hard to figure out. Endurance. When the realization came upon him, he embraced the so-called training and decided to swim along with him. There was a problem, however. Compared to Luffy, he was slow. Like, really slow. It hurt his pride to admit it, but seeing Luffy in the water was something otherworldly. It almost made him think he might be part fishman. The first time he tried to swim with his future captain and his pet sea monster, Zoro wasn't just struggling to keep up, he physically couldn't. They had to come back and pick him up because Luffy, the idiot that he was, didn't even notice the swordsman had been left behind. Eventually, they came up with a system so he could actually train instead of having to be picked up every couple of minutes. When Luffy was swimming, he would rest or eat in the boat and vice versa. When Zoro was in the water, Levi swam at a much slower pace, so his master's friend could keep up. It was obvious who the monster liked swimming with more, much to a certain Verde's chagrin. The sea beast liked to swim fast and his master could swim fast. Not as fast as him, but fast enough to make it fun. Even though Zoro's assumption about the nature of the training was partially correct, he was still missing a crucial piece of it, and that piece was all Luffy thought about as he swam. Yes, endurance was a big part of it. But, the reason for building that endurance was what drove the younger boy. While training with Shanks all those years ago, the one thing that he beat into Luffy more than anything else was the fact that using armament haky wasn't free. Using armament haky not only took a certain amount of concentration, but it also used up energy. By building up stamina, one could increase the amount of time spent using it. If they were to ever run out of stamina from overuse of armament, not only would it be physically taxing, leaving most barely able to walk, but it would also leave them unable to use it again for a certain period. The length of that period, once again, depended on the person. It could be anywhere from 10 minutes to the rest of the day if they were fully matured. To sum it up, even though stamina didn't increase the potency of armament haky, it did increase the amount of time one could use it before their body gave out. Therefore, Luffy swam. and swam, and swam, and swam, and then swam some more. Luffy could swim at full speed for up to an hour at this point, but he wanted more. He wanted to be able to swim between islands if he had to. He wanted to be able to swim forever. So he always swam as hard as he could, and whenever he got tired he'd switch out with Zoro. Every time they switched, Luffy made it his goal to go for longer than he did when he was last in the water, and while he couldn't always make that happen, there was a steady increase in the amount of time could spend swimming. Just thinking of what he could possibly do by the time he became a pirate made him giddy. Maybe he could just swim to the Grand Line. Well, he couldn't leave behind Zoro or anyone else that might be on his crew, so that was a no-go, but it would still be cool. The two future crewmates sat in companionable silence as they ate during one of the few times they were both resting. It had been a week. Surely there had to be an island somewhere close. Zoro, Zor, what do you want? The swordsman yelled in annoyance. I'm Bori Edd, Luffy replied, oblivious to the dirty looks his future first mate was sending him. I want to get to the next island, so baad. But every time I look out it's just more water and no islands. Make there be an island, Zoro, please, he begged. I really did decide to follow the biggest idiot, Zoro thought to himself. Taking a deep breath, he tried to give a calm answer. Luffy, I can't just make an island appear out of thin air. Now stop bothering me so I can eat in peace. To be fair, he was already a little irritable about the fact that he forgot to load any alcohol onto the boat before they left, and Luffy's non-stop pestering certainly wasn't helping his mood. Listen, I'm sure Levi knows where he's taking us, so just trust in your friend and next thing you know, we'll be landbound, he compromised. At this, Luffy seemed to perk up. After all, Zoro was right. He just had to trust in his friend. Levi hadn't led him astray so far, and he trusted that he wouldn't in the future. The two finished their meals in companionable silence, Zoro shooting a thoughtful look at the other inhabitant of the boat. Ever since their first spar, he couldn't get the sight of that black substance appearing on Luffy's shoulder and knuckles out of his head. Just what exactly was that? He also had a sea monster under his command, and even though he insisted they were friends, there had to be more to it than that, right? Who the hell can just be friends with a sea monster? Having already decided he'd ask later about the sea monster part, Zoro could mostly ignore that. However, part of him couldn't help but be curious about the metal that appeared on his future captain's shoulder and fist. Not only did it look like metal, it sure as hell felt like it too. It could have been a devil fruit, but even if there was one that made what Luffy did possible, they were supposed to take away the user's ability to swim, and Luffy could certainly swim. Plus, he considered them a myth anyway, so that option felt like a long shot. His curiosity getting the better of him, the older boy asked, "Alright Luffy. Most of the time I try to stay out of other people's business, but I can't stop thinking about our first spar." Luffy's head perked up as Zoro began, and he nodded for him to continue, staying uncharacteristically silent. "When we sparred for the first time, every time I touched you with any of my swords it almost felt like I was trying to cut metal, and then there was the black stuff at the end when you blasted me through several trees and into a rock." He stopped to see if Luffy would say anything, but when he didn't he decided to continue. "At first I thought it might be a devil fruit, but I'm pretty sure those are a myth, so that can. Devil fruits are real." Luffy interrupted, fingering his necklace at the question, its purple gemstone resting comfortably against his chest. "What?" Zoro asked incredulously. The straw-hatted teen smirked at the shocked look on his friend's face. "Devil fruits are real," he repeated. "I almost ate one when I was a kid, but..." Zoro continued to look at the boy in slight disbelief, still not quite believing him. "But what?" "Secret," Luffy replied with a teasing smile. Ignoring that for the moment, the Verde continued his questioning. "So, you ate a devil fruit and that's why your skin seems like it's as hard as metal? And is that black stuff part of it too?" "Nope, haven't eaten a devil fruit. I wouldn't be able to swim if I did. Shanks told me that," he stated with a faraway look. He gently unweaved his fingers from his necklace and smiled as if looking back on a happy memory. At this, Zoro was even more confused. If it wasn't a devil fruit, which he just found out were real if his future captain was to be believed, then what the hell was it? Also, why did he feel like he'd hear or? "So, what, it's magic? Were you experimented on?" asked Zoro exasperatedly. What else could it be? Normal human beings couldn't do stuff like that. At least he couldn't do that. Could he? The laughter that burst from Luffy's lips only irritated the Verde more as he patiently waited for the younger boy's response. After he got his chuckles under control, Luffy answered, and while not the answer Zoro was hoping for, it was enough to satisfy the swordsman for now. Sorry Zoro, but for some reason, those guesses were really funny to me. He started, still giggling slightly at the scowling teen. Looking at Zoro, he knew he wasn't going to tell him about haky yet. Luffy wanted him to figure it out on his own. Not only was he certain Zoro could do it, but he also just wasn't completely sure he could teach it the right way. He was only 16 after all. If the concept were easy to grasp, there would surely be more people who knew of it and, consequently, more people who knew how to teach it. Hahowever, those people were few and far between, and Luffy was not one of them. He could most likely explain what it felt like while he was using it, but explaining how to summon haky, especially for the first time, was a different story. For all of the training he'd done with armament enhancement and haky in general over the years, Luffy only really had around 4 months of actual instruction. Plus, most of that time was spent learning to control his conqueror's haky. It turned out that 7-year-olds didn't learn very quickly, especially when their teacher loved to tease them. With Shanks it was different. He had an understanding of haky that Luffy just didn't have. The man only had time to give him the bare bones when it came to enhancement. Everything else Luffy had just figured out on his own. If he knew as much solid information about haky as Shanks did, he didn't think he'd have a problem teaching Zoro. But, at the end of the day, he didn't. However, that didn't mean he couldn't start him on the right path. The reason my skin is so hard and the stuff that appeared on my fist are the same thing, but at the same time, not. Stated Luffy, contradictorily. Before Zoro could interrupt, Luffy raised his hand to stop him and started his hardening to his knuckles. Soon enough the familiar feeling came to him, skin shifting from its usual peach color to a dull gray-black. He immediately noticed the drain it was already having on his stamina. Looked like more swimming in his future, a lot more. Also, from what he remembered, Shanks' haky had looked darker, weird. Zoro's eyes immediately went to the black substance on Luffy's hand, his question forgotten for the time being. This power is something anyone can learn, Zoro, and I expect you to learn it too. I think you'll need to if you plan on being the world's greatest swordsman, said the straw-hatted boy. The swordsman made to interrupt again, but Luffy stopped him once more. Before you ask, I'm not going to teach it to you. As much as I would like to, I think it'd be better if you figured it out on your own. If by the time we set out for the Grand Line you still want me to, I'll try and teach you. Sound good? If Zoro hadn't already been baffled by the information that he could also use the mysterious power, he certainly would have been baffled at the way Luffy had just spoken. He'd actually sounded smart for once. If I can use whatever it is that this power is, I don't know if I'd want you to help me anyway. I think you're right. It's best if I learn this on my own. My own path to strength. The swordsman replied after recovering from his shock. Luffy could only smile at his first mate's attitude. He knew he'd chosen a great person for his crew. Alright, now that that's settled, Zoro, I'm bored, the straw-hatted teen yelled childishly. Tick mark returning, Zoro chose not to reply and instead lay down for a nap, trying to figure out where to start in learning the new and mysterious power he'd just been told about. I see it, Zoro. I see it, Luffy yelled from his position on top of Levi's head. Zoro abruptly awoke, wiping the grogginess from his eyes. Luffy, if I open my eyes, all the way, and there isn't an island in front of me, I'll find some way to get past that skin of yours and… Shut up and look, interrupted the younger boy. Gosh, I can't wait. Levi, go faster. The black-haired boy joyously yelled without any regard for the other passenger in the boat. Just as Zoro stood up to look at the island they would be arriving at, Levi bolted forward on his master's command. The Verde's feet almost slid out from under him, however, he was quick enough to use his sword to stabilize himself. What the hell, Luffy? I could have fallen off. He tried to scream through the wind now blowing in his face. Slowly but surely, Zoro was able to make it to the bow of the boat and look ahead, toward the direction they were moving in. Sure enough, quickly coming closer into view was an island with a long curve of beach. Just past the water was a street that seemed to stretch the entire coastline. Looking further was hard at this distance, but from what he could see, it seemed to be the outermost part of a city that began getting denser the further one moved inland. As the party was approaching, Luffy asked Levi to stop. Zoro had warned him of scaring people and that was the last thing he wanted. "Alright buddy. I think this is where we part ways for a little while, again," smiled Luffy to his friend. Levi lowered his head so Luffy could step back onto the boat, and once he was safely on the vessel, the boy turned to say goodbye. "See ya in a little while, buddy," he said tenderly. The sea beast pushed his nose into his master's face, nuzzling him before letting out what sounded like a deep purr and diving to go explore the waters of the East Blue he'd yet to see. "Zoro, we might have a problem," Luffy murmured under his breath after a moment of silence, knowing he was about to get in trouble. Zoro looked at his companion with a dangerous glint in his eye. "Luffy, we haven't even made it to the island yet, what problem could we possibly have?" he deadpanned. Luffy gulped and cautiously replied to his scary-looking friend, "I don't think he'll be back for a while." Zoro was dreading asking the question, but he had to. How long is a while? However, even as the words left his mouth he realized, in actuality, he hoped it wouldn't be short. He hated to admit it, but he needed time. Time, to sort out his world that had just been turned upside down, not 2 weeks ago. "Well, last time I heard him like that he was gone for." The younger boy started, counting on his fingers. You know what? Let's just say it was a while, cause I don't really remember." Luffy bent and threw his hands over his head, expecting Zoro to be angry. The Verde only eyed the boy that would be his future captain. "Don't act like you don't know we could probably be off this island in a couple of weeks if we wanted to. You just don't know if I'll stay to wait on your sea monster friend." Realistically, the two could probably earn the money to feed themselves for another journey in a month, at most. They already had the boat. They only needed more supplies. Not having Levi around would certainly slow them down, but they could paddle just fine, and he was sure the small vessel was seaworthy enough to make it to the next island. "But we've got to wait for him. He's my friend, plus, we wouldn't know where we are going. Your sense of direction is terrible and you probably can't even read a compass." Luffy pouted, removing his hands from his head and looking at Zoro, childish outrage on his face. "You idiot! My direction is just fine. It takes me where I need to go," Zoro yelled with shark teeth. He took a deep breath to calm himself down. "Hear me out, at least," he started, and Luffy immediately sat straighter, hope blooming in his eyes. "I don't mind staying, all that much. However, I do have a condition." Luffy was curious. Green-haired swordsman continue without interruption. "I want to be alone for our entire stay on this island," Zoro said, eyes gauging his companion for his reaction. "What the hell am I supposed to do then?" Luffy groaned, falling onto his back and stretching out across the floorboards. "I don't know, but can you blame me for needing time by myself?" the swordsman asked seriously. "The conversation we had a while back made me realize that there's more to this world than I'd come to believe." He explained, "You say there's power inside all of us. You even showed it to me, and now I want to find it. I want to figure this out on my own, and you saying Levi will be gone for a while gives me time to do it." He looked Luffy in the eyes. "There's something here for me to learn. I can feel it," he finished, casting his gaze to the coast before him. The straw-hatted teen saw the look in his friend's eye and knew he couldn't argue. "Fine. I guess I'll have to find something to do." He sighed and laid his head back down. What was he supposed to do by himself? Well, he could figure that out later. Right now, he was too excited about the new island. A laugh rose to his throat and he jumped to his feet. He would finally be doing something fun that wasn't swimming. Well, when he found that something at least. "That's all right with me, Zoro. I'll figure something out," he said, jumping onto the older boy's back and interrupting the swordsman's staring match with the coastline. "Get off of me," he yelled, swatting at a laughing Luffy hanging on his shoulders. After receiving several smacks to the face, the younger boy released his hold on the swordsman and grabbed an oar, Zoro following suit. Still a ways off from the beach, Zoro noticed something interesting. It seemed as if they were getting closer to the water. It was weird. They couldn't be sinking. Right? He looked down at his feet and all he could do was sigh, saying nothing as he stopped paddling and crossed his arms with a look of resignation on his face. On the other side of the boat, Luffy was paddling like mad. He was ready to see the island. The closer they got, the more he had an idea of where he wanted to go. The trees looked to be a hard line for where the city stopped, and he could see why. Toward the westernmost side of the city was what looked to be a massive forest. It had to be. The trees he was looking at were huge. From the distance, though, all he could see were pale gray trunks that carried their way up to dark green canopies hanging high above the ground below. Looking at such a large and dense gathering of nature, Luffy couldn't help but be reminded of how much fun hunting and exploring the forest of his home was. He and his brothers had explored all there was to explore in the mountains back when they were just kids. So, at the sight of the trees, the teen was excited. Big trees meant big forest and big forest meant big animals. He loved big animals, hunting and befriending them. So entranced by the sight, Luffy failed to notice the boat beginning to move considerably slower and, coming out of his thoughts, turned to look at Zoro. "Why the heck aren't you paddling? We will get there faster if you zhoo." The straw-hatted teen cut himself off when he realized something odd. His sandals felt a little wet. Looking down, he sighed much the same as his companion. The boat that had carried the two thus far had not come out of the journey unscathed. The speed at which Levi had pulled the small craft left almost all of the hull practically gone. It was a miracle they were even still floating at this point. The water could be seen through the bottom of the boat. How neither of them noticed until now, the world may never know. Luffy stopped paddling as their faithful vessel sunk into the water, and once the two were completely submerged he turned, addressing his friend. "Well, I'm not waiting on you 'cause you're slow and you want to be alone," he said, childishly sticking out his tongue. Neither of them were going to address the fact that their boat had just sunk. "But, I'll see you in a while, Zoro. I'll know when Levi's back, for sure," exclaimed the younger boy, smiling his signature smile. Just as the black-haired boy was preparing to turn toward the island, Zoro spoke up. "I'll be stronger when next we meet," the swordsman stated, holding his future captain's eyes with his own. It was a statement that made Luffy grin. And that was exactly what it was. A statement. He could hear the conviction in his friend's voice. The straw-hatted teen smiled to himself. He very much believed the words. "Well, I'm gonna get stronger too," he replied. "Next time we see each other, let's leave this island and find someone strong to fight. It's been way too long since I've fought against someone all out." "I couldn't agree more," smirked Zoro, watching the boy turn toward their destination. "You better still be capable of beating me when we meet again." Luffy, however, didn't hear his reply. He had already bolted towards the island. The swordsman sighed one last time. Time for the long swim to port. Chapter 4. Fateful Meetings. Luffy swam like his life depended on it. He wanted to see the forest up close. Plus, he could probably hunt for food once he made it, especially if the forest was as big as it looked from there. He was pretty hungry. The shore quickly came into view and the teen slowed down as he approached. The nice thing about the boat sinking was Luffy and Zoro now had nothing to dock. Plus, they had just finished the last of the food. The only thing either of them had brought, worth keeping, was Zoro's katana. Thinking back on it, Luffy swore he could sometimes hear it talking to Zoro. But he never figured out if he was just hearing things. If he wasn't, he had a feeling that what was being said was only for the swordsman's ear. Luffy's feet finally found sand and the water became more shallow as he approached the beach. He walked out of the ocean, the waves crashing behind his feet, and the teenager acted like he was doing nothing wrong as he headed toward the throngs of people occupying the street. Because he wasn't. There was nothing wrong with swimming onto an island as far as he was aware. There were many people going about their various activities for the day, from shopping to working, and some just enjoying the coast. Continuing to make his way down the street, he noticed several different stalls selling different colored stones shaped like the moon. Well, the moon sometimes. He thought he remembered Makino calling it a waning crescent back when he was her student. Luffy looked on those memories fondly. He wasn't the best at learning, but Makino had always been patient with him. As he passed yet another stall selling the stones, he curiously eyed one of them and couldn't help but wonder what they were all about. Finding himself too curious after passing stall number he couldn't even count, the boy approached one of the women selling the, apparently popular, moon-shaped rocks. "Excuse me, miss," said Luffy, getting the stall owner's attention. Yes, young man. Is there something you see that interests you?" she asked in a grandmotherly tone, gesturing to the wares that were being sold. "I was actually curious about these," he replied, picking up one of the moon-shaped rocks and examining it. There was nothing really special about it. Just some porous stone carved into a curious shape. Well, you see, that shape you're holding in your hand is actually the shape of this city, the old stall owner answered. Her words surprised Luffy. Why would someone want to make a city in the shape of the moon? Well, the moon sometimes. When he thought about it though, it was actually kind of cool. The woman turned and looked toward the large trees behind her. It was by no one's choice that our city takes this shape. All of the land that could be used for building has been taken up. The trees you see in the distance have proved to be infallible for any who have tried. They're what make the city take the shape it does. The old shopkeeper paused and thought as she gazed at the trees. There's an old legend about how this island came to be. Actually, it wasn't a very well-known story and it was quite fantastical, so she enjoyed telling it. It said that long ago there lived a woman more beautiful than any in the world. When the woman turned around to continue her storytelling, she noticed that the young boy she'd been talking to was no longer there. Young man? She spoke quizzically into the empty air in front of her. She sighed to herself, realizing he was gone for good. Young people these days can't wait for anything. A shame really, it was a wonderful story. Luffy couldn't help but think it was pretty cool that the city was shaped like the moon. He'd left before the woman began her story, making his way toward the trees he could see looming over the city. The boy was completely oblivious to the fact that the woman was even going to tell a story at all. If he'd known, he might have actually stayed. He loved good stories. However, he had other things on his mind, namely adventure, and, by his estimate, it would take him most of the day to make it to the forest. Well, there was no use in lollygagging. He picked up his feet and started running. He wanted to get there as fast as he could. He could smell an adventure. Zoro arrived in much the same fashion as Luffy, the swimming taking far longer. The swordsman just could not swim at the speed Luffy could. He knew he would never beat Luffy in a swimming contest and he was okay with it. He never enjoyed swimming that much anyway. Making his way to the street, his katana tucked safely into his haramaki, Zoro decided not to pick any direction and just let his feet take him where he needed to go. It's not as if picking a direction would have helped anyway. After walking the coast for what seemed a good amount of time, the team cut inland. As he walked, he noticed that he was passing more actual buildings rather than just stalls the further he made it. Eventually, everything began to look the same, so he stopped focusing on his surroundings and began to think. The first thing to cross his mind was that he would need a place to stay and a way to eat. He'd be on the island for a while, according to Luffy, and in that time he was going to try and unlock the power his future captain had told him about. He had faith in himself that he could do it. The only problem was, he had no idea where to begin. It was like reading something out of a storybook. You read about amazing things and wish for something like that to become reality, but you never actually expect it to happen. Well, it did. It had happened and Zoro was lost. Not for the first time in his life, certainly. However, this time it was more metaphorical than literal. He'd not changed physically, however, his perception of the world had changed. If Luffy was this far ahead of him, just how far ahead was he? It was like a film had been lifted from the Verde's eyes and the thought of it had ignited a fire in his very soul. He needed to get stronger. His dream depended on it. He was brought out of his musings by the sound of a large gathering of people. Without realizing it, Zoro had walked into what looked to him like some sort of town square. A small fountain stood in the center of the area, crowds walking around it from store to store shopping to their heart's content. All around, stood shops selling various things. Food, clothing, weapons, trinkets, you name it, and it was more than likely being sold somewhere. Zoro pushed his way into the crowd and, just above the dull roar of the conversations around him, heard something that almost called to him, a hammer on metal. Something in his stomach curled with excitement, although he couldn't say why. Or was that his hip? When asked about it later, he wouldn't be able to give a good answer. He walked as if in a trance through the throngs of people toward the building he could hear the clangs of metal on metal coming from. When he'd finally reached his destination, without even reading the sign above the door, he made his way inside. The swordsman just knew there was something there for him to learn. If he would have stopped to look, the sign hanging above the door read, Brewer's Blades. It took Luffy a surprisingly short amount of time to reach the western edge of the city. When he really put his mind to it, he could run pretty fast. He had managed to, somehow, find most of the paths and alleyways that weren't very crowded. He didn't really think much of it though, the black-haired boy just attributed it to luck and moved on. As he passed the last buildings of the city, he crossed into a clearing that sat just before the tree line. Walking into the area, he noticed that the trees there at the edge of the forest started small and appeared to grow larger as you got deeper. Luffy couldn't help but be mesmerized by the majesty of the sight before him and stopped to stare. He had never seen such a thing before. The 16-year-old had seen large objects and animals before, so when it came to things of magnitude he was no sse magnificent creations of Mother Nature were unlike anything the young boy had ever seen. He approached one of the trees and looked up, toward its top. Even the branches were huge. Scratch that, everything was huge, the leaves too. The tree was also extremely tall. It certainly wasn't the tallest thing the teen would see in his life, but it was most definitely the single tallest thing he'd seen in his short life so far. And he'd seen a castle. Placing his hand against the bark, Luffy was surprised to find the light gray texture smooth rather than coarse, as he would have expected. "Quite beautiful, don't you think?" a voice came from over his shoulder. The teen turned curiously to the owner of the airy voice. He didn't remember anyone else being in the clearing and he was sure he would have noticed someone else walking out of the city. The distance between the last of the buildings and the forest wasn't very short after all. "Who are you?" Luffy asked, taking in the stranger before him. He was tall, and the boy's first thought was that the man may have looked younger if his hair wasn't white. The stranger's head was framed by two long wavy strands of white hair that were bridged by short bangs hanging just above his eyebrows. At the back, the rest of his hair was pulled into a ponytail, held by a golden band. The man had a boyish face that had wrinkled slightly with age, kind dark black eyes, and a soft smile that played on his lips. A forest green coat that bore a single gold button on its left sleeve rested on the old man's shoulders. Underneath, he wore a pale yellow shirt, along with a pair of maroon trousers and dark black boots. Lastly, at his waist was tied an orange sash. Tucked into it was a long nodashi, its blade hidden in a sheath made of dark lacquered wood. "Just an old man who spends his days here as a promise to an old friend," the curious man stated, wistfully. Luffy heard the word friend and all reservations about the strange person disappeared, his expression immediately brightening. "Friend? I've got a cool friend too," he exclaimed before a pout took over his face. "He did tell me he wanted to be alone the whole time we're here though." "Your friend has left you alone?" the older man asked, frowning curiously. The straw-hatted teen thought about the question for a moment. "Yeah, but it was kind of my fault. I told him some stuff that changed some stuff and then he said he needed time to think about it, so yeah, definitely my fault," he answered with a laughing smile. Zoro was just so interesting to him. He especially liked the way he used 3 swords. Luffy then remembered that he had been responsible for breaking 2 of said swords and instead of feeling apologetic, only hoped his green-haired friend would find 2 more so he could see more of the cool way he fought. He loved watching people fight. When he was young, it was a way Makino had helped him learn. He thought that was a good thing. Otherwise, he could have ended up really dumb. "So, what I'm hearing is you let him be alone," the stranger said, having puzzled it out. Luffy remembered the look in his friend's eye before their boat had sunk. He had no doubt he was going to be even stronger when they met again. Coming out of his thoughts, the young boy tuned back into the conversation. "Yeah, I guess you could say that. I think he'll be stronger once he has time to figure things out," he spoke in return. "A much more mature answer than I perhaps thought you may give," the wizened man said, surprise evident in his eyes. Luffy pointed offendedly in the old guy's direction. "Hey, that was kinda mean," he replied. The stranger only laughed as he walked past the boy and into the large forest, signaling to follow. "Come with me, young one. It's been far too long since I was last able to talk with such an interesting person," he said, his small smile back in place. "What brings you to this island if I might ask?" he questioned as they broke through the tree line and entered the large expanse of nature. Luffy was mesmerized. The trees were huge. The further he looked into the forest, the larger and taller they became. If this was the start, just how big were the ones toward the middle of the forest? He stopped staring as they continued walking and answered, "Well, do you want the long version or the short version?" he asked. The red-vested boy remembered explaining to Ririka and it had taken far too long. He'd even missed the execution because of it. "The short version will do," The man replied. The straw-hatted teen smiled at the answer. I came here to get strong and have fun, he said simply. And it was the truth. He'd set out to gain experience and to find strength in that experience. In Luffy's mind, however, it was much more simple. Having adventures meant doing fun stuff and getting stronger. You sound like my old friend when you say things like that. The older man spoke, wistfully, as the two continued on their path through the forest. Really? Luffy asked excitedly, was he a cool guy? The stranger's smile largened imperceptibly. He was, in fact, a very cool guy. Can you tell me about him? The teen asked. Hope evident in his voice. He loved learning about cool people. He eyed the boy behind him as they walked and his smile grew. No, I don't think I will. What the heck? You were totally supposed to say yes, Luffy cried in outrage. Nope. You're so mean. The teen huffed dejectedly, crossing his arms, a pout on his face. The old man only laughed and chose to stay silent rather than respond as they continued to make their way through the forest. Quickly becoming bored with the silence, the large trees absorbed Luffy once again and he began to run his hands along the ones he would pass. With more time to inspect them, he realized they were more tube-like than any trees he'd seen before. It felt like the tree had been sanded down and left smooth. Like really smooth. He hadn't heard about many other islands, to begin with, but he knew that this kind of stuff wasn't normal in the blues. The Grand Line shore. Shanks had told him the stories. Granted, he had grown up in a place where animals could be huge, but the trees were something else. Hey, old guy. What's the name of this place? Luffy asked, seemingly out of the blue. The name of this island is East Lodestone. The forest has no name, most simply call it Lodestone Forest. Said old guy answered, not interrupting his stride. First off, that is a name, the younger boy pointed out, and second off, why east? He asked. Luffy thought it was a good enough question. Why not west? After all, the forest was on the west side. At least he thought this was the west side. He didn't really care much for the answer, honestly, he just really liked talking to the old man. East Lodestone shares 3 sisters. One in each blue, all bearing one counterpart. The stranger answered, cryptically, keeping his eyes on the path before him. Luffy could only stare at the back of the man's head. I don't know what that means. He stated, blankly. He'd never been good with people who talked in confusing ways. And nor is it, really, for you to understand, until you reach Laughtail, that is. The older man glanced back at the teen, pointing a thumb at his hat from over his shoulder. If you're wearing that, can I assume that the end of the Grand Line is, most likely, your destination? He questioned, the wistful tone of voice back once again. Hey, how the heck did you know that, Gramps? Luffy asked, eyeing the old guy curiously. He was sure he hadn't mentioned anything about being a pirate. I happen to know the original owner of that hat, the tall man said, a full-blown smile gracing his face. The straw-hatted teen was off to the side enough to see the old guy's smile, and it was the first time he'd seen the older man show any real emotion since they'd met. He decided that it was a good look on him. It made the wrinkles in his face almost disappear, somehow, and made him appear younger. So caught up in missed what had been said that actually made the old man smile. He just smiled his smile in return. The stranger's eyes widened and he continued smiling. Young man, there is a cave in the heart of this place that is guarded by, what some call, the Forest Lord and others, the Lord of the Forest. He began, it matters not to me what name you choose to use. I only wish to tell you that if you find their cave and best them, they will grant you the treasure they guard. If Luffy wasn't already invested, the word treasure would have sealed the deal. He was definitely going to beat the forest guy and steal his treasure. Well, not steal. He wasn't a pirate yet, he was going to win it. Before anything though, he needed to find the place. He wasn't sure how big the forest was, but from the size and look of the trees, he felt that just doing that would take forever. Everything looked the same, it was all just gray bark and dark green leaves. The chances that he was about to get lost were very high. That meant he needed to get started and soon. I'll do it, old man. I'll beat Forest Guy and get his treasure, declared Luffy, starting to pass the man who'd led him thus far. Something in the way the boy said it made the white-haired man believe him. He could also quite possibly die, said man thought, slightly frowning to himself. The boy didn't look very strong. As Luffy sprinted towards parts of the forest the stranger hadn't visited in a very long time, he spared a look at the back of Luffy's red vest. The red color and the straw hat reminded him of a similar red-colored coat he used to see around the shoulders of the man who wore that very same straw hat. "Before you leave," the old man exclaimed after the familiar color. The boy stopped and turned, impatience written all over his face. "What is it, Gramps? I gotta go find Forest Guy or whatever," he shouted, clearly wanting him to get to the point. "Would it be so rude of me if I asked for your name?" he asked. Luffy recoiled, shocked, as if it was just hitting him for the first time that they hadn't yet introduced themselves. It most certainly was. "Sorry about that," he said, laughing, his signature smile in place. "My name's Monkey D. Luffy, and I'm gonna be the king of the pirates." The stranger smiled one more big smile before replying, "Well, Monkey D. Luffy, future king of the pirates. My name is Spencer. And I am very glad to have met you." He waved Luffy toward deeper parts of the forest. "Go and seek your treasure, young friend. This is farewell." "But we will see each other again someday, right?" the teen asked. "I think not," Spencer replied, the same small smile he had worn since the two met gracing his lips once again. Luffy made to argue, but the older man shot him a scary look. "Go," he said once more, "your treasure awaits." "Whatever, Gramps. It was nice meeting you anyways," the teenager exclaimed with a smile, making his way ahead and into the forest. He might not see the old man again, but he was glad he got to meet him. He'd given him an adventure to go on. As Spencer lost track of Luffy's form to Trunks of Gray, he knew, regardless, he was staying out of it. The old man had promised himself to let the era Roger created take the mantle, and he wasn't going to interfere. If the child died here in this forest, the child died. Who was he kidding? It wasn't him he needed to worry about. He would need to worry for the world. The young man was sure to turn it upside down. "Your will is in good hands, Roger." Entering the building, Zoro immediately heard the dull pings of a metal hammer coming from somewhere in the back. However, the chime of the bell above the door rang clearly throughout the shop and the rhythmic sound ceased. Shuffling replaced the loud noises, and a muscular graying man made his way out of the back, soot covering his arms and face. "What can I do ya for, son?" the man asked, gesturing to the various arms around the store. "As ya can see, we sell blades and one or two other things." The man walked to a counter where a register sat and gestured for Zoro to approach. The green-haired teenager acquiesced and began to walk toward the counter the store owner now stood behind. His eyes scanned his surroundings as he made his way through the shop. There were different sections for different types of blades, and Zoro could see every kind of sword he could think of. Many cases were holding different, seemingly rare, blades of all sorts of make. The most cared for cases, however, seemed to be the katanas. He'd have to ask the shopkeeper about them later. Taking space, directly in the middle of the shop, were mannequins. As far as the swordsman could tell, they were only there to show off the few sets of armor being sold. Zoro walked around them as he approached and was, finally, able to get a good look at the man he was talking to. Well, his top half. However, it was more than enough to look at. The older man in front of the Verde was a mountain of muscle. The blacksmith stood, at the least, a foot taller than the younger boy and bore arms as large as his head. He had long graying hair, peppered with spots of white and black, tied back into a high ponytail, and a beard of the same coloring. His face was long and wrinkled with age, but his eyes hadn't lost their spark. Their amber color flashed gold in the sunlight peeking through the windows and contrasted beautifully with the dark ebony of his skin. He wore a striped green tank top that showed off his massive muscles, and that was all the swordsman could see. Reaching the counter, Zoro received an expectant look from the man behind it. "I'm not here to buy anything, at least, not right now," he answered to the man's earlier question, looking him right in the eye. He did still need 2 more swords, but that could wait. Something had led him to this shop, so he was sure it was where he was supposed to be. "Window shopper then," the older man huffed, turning to walk back to the room he came from. "I don't much like people like you. Always talking me away from my fore." "I'm not here as a shopper, at all," Zoro interrupted, beginning to follow the man. "That sound earlier, what was it from?" The subject change threw the older man off, but he recovered quickly. "Ya mean the forgan I was doing?" he asked, curiously. He chose to forget the rude interruption. It wasn't often someone came in to ask about blacksmithing. Forging? Zoro asked, eyes narrowing in excitement. The feeling from before was back. I'm a blacksmith, so, yeah. I was in the back forging some custom pieces when Ya came in. The blacksmith said, nonchalantly. He stopped when he saw Zoro following him. He wasn't letting some brat anywhere near his forge. It was his baby. He didn't care if they wanted to know about blacksmithing or not. Teach me, Zoro said, to the hulking man in front of him. The man stared at Zoro in the eyes for a few seconds, as if looking for something, before turning and continuing his way back to his baby. No. I refuse. The teen was interrupted by the door shutting in his face. The swordsman closed his eyes and huffed in annoyance. That was, kind of expected. He knew he was supposed to be there. He just had to get the man to teach him. It had hit him when the blacksmith mentioned forging. If he knew how it was made, wouldn't that mean he could better use it? Zoro turned away from the door and started walking back toward the exit. He was going to be back. Every day. Every day, until the man agreed to teach him. He decided he would spend all his time on it if he had to. He didn't know how learning to forge a sword would help him in unlocking the power he was looking for, but he didn't think much on it. Luffy would definitely be mad that he wasn't actually spending his time alone, but he knew this would make him stronger. Therefore, he would pursue it.